Hi, everyone. It's The Right Side Up with James Scholl and Danielle Strickland. Usually it's the other way around, but we're doing it this time because I'm introducing it. And this time we are really excited because we have Brian Zahnd on the podcast with us.
Yeah, we
We
are.
were fanning out over him before the podcast and we're like, we should just record this so the people in public can know how wonderful Brian is. If you don't know who Brian is, we'll let him introduce himself. My little introduction for him, he's the pastor of the Word of Life Church in St. Joseph, Missouri. He's authored 11 books. I think the most recent one was The Wood Between the Worlds, which is the one that I've been giving out to people recently. Has there another one come out before since then?
There's a book that comes out May 19th.
Okay, then.
Very soon.
We
Yay.
should talk about that as well as some of the things you've been talking about.
Also, I
Brian.
will mention, just for listeners to this podcast, that my number one, recommendation for people who are deconstructing or know people who are deconstructing is the book When Everything is on Fire that Brian, you wrote, which I really love. I think is really meaningful and helpful to people. So if you're listening to this and you're looking for, these people just aren't buying it and they're leaving the so-called church, get Everything's on Fire and give them a copy. I think it's a really helpful recentering of the big, ancient, beautiful faith that we profess in Jesus. So thanks for writing that, Brian. It was good for my soul.
Thank you, Danielle. And since we're just talking here, first of all, thank you for all the kind remarks. The book that comes out May 19th is called Unseen Existences of Heaven, Earth, and the Divine Mystery in All Things. And I would say it is most like When Everything's on Fire. It's sort of, I won't say it's a sequel, but it's in that same sort of genre. So you might like that one too.
Like,
we'll find out.
Do you do like any of the APES stuff? Like, do you buy into apostolic, prophetic, teacher, shepherd? Because I feel like you are always speaking a prophetic word, it would seem to me, and not just like the prophetic as in like, I've got a word from the Lord that you're going to be, turning right soon. It's going to be a big surprise. Not like that, but like to the American church. It feels like you have a role that is a prophetic one to the American church.
I hear that often, and so that's just for other people to decide. I'm not going to put a mantle upon myself or anything like that. I just, I try to say what I think needs to be said. I write from the heart. I don't go necessarily looking for books, like trying to catch a butterfly with a net, sort of thing. I'm just, I try to write what I cannot not write. You understand what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
whatever's, there and that I want to give voice to in some way, that's what I write.
Brian,
But I mean,
you recently...
but I'm in a context, right? I mean, I'm not just...
Yeah. Right.
And so I
You
try
sure
to
are.
speak from my own context, yeah. Because
Okay,
that's
so
what
let's
makes
talk...
it honest.
Yeah, and also like you're situated in a real place in real circumstances, and you speak out of that place. What you recently posted online on your socials that I think it's like I think it's just by way of introduction to people who might not know who you are on this podcast. I think it's like during the Iraq War, you were a supporter, and that was like when you were fully square, like, hey, I agree with some of these things. And now in the Iran war, you're like, whoa, I am so far from where I was. And you sort of reflected on that, which I think is maybe telling us a little bit about that journey that you've been on might help people know who you are.
Okay, well, let's see where to start. I come from the Jesus movement, all right? One, that means I'm an old dude.
Maybe give a bit of context for those of us that aren't old dudes or American,
so,
Brian. That might be helpful.
This is the counterculture movement of the 70s that instead of looking to the Beatles to be the Messiah, actually began to look to Jesus.
Or Larry Norman.
Messiah. And so I'm the long-haired Zeppelin freak that at age 15 had this dramatic conversion. I mean, everybody in the high school is like, man, what happened to Fry? That's what they called me then. Nobody called me Pastor Brian. I was Fry. And I had this dramatic encounter with Jesus. It completely changed everything. By the time I was 17, I was leading a ministry, which is ridiculous, that by the time I was 22, just sort of turned into Word of Life Church. And that was 44 years ago. So I've been just doing one thing this whole time. Now, what I'll say is the Jesus movement led us into the charismatic movement. I mean, there's just the way it happened. I mean, you didn't make a choice. It just happened that way. And I described the charismatic movement as good until it wasn't. And so if you were just part of that general milieu, that movement, you're on that train, it sort of just led into an assumption that right-wing politics in general, the Republican Party in particular, was part of the package deal. So that's why and what's interesting though, as a teenager, I read the Sermon on the Mount and I knew that waging war was incompatible with following Christ. But then I got taught, so, and then what happened was, so I was, I'm just turning 40 as we go into, 9/11, Gulf War, all of that. And so I went along with it just because, you're on the bus and that's where it's going. But I had another dramatic conversion, one as a teenager and one in my early 40s where I was born again. And that's kind of how it has to be. And that just changed everything. And that happened, in my early 40s. I didn't have a crisis of faith regarding Jesus. I just arrived at the point where I knew that the Jesus who had captured my heart deserved a better Christianity than I knew. And I just began to look around and I thought, we started off as really radical, and none of this feels radical anymore. It feels consumerist. It feels pedestrian, domesticated. It feels altogether too American. And so I didn't really know what to do about it. But what I did, I think there was an instinct. I started reading the church fathers. In other words, I thought, well, I'm going to back up as far as I can, And so I just started reading the church fathers, kind of in order chronologically, the major important ones. And that began to change me. And that helped me find what I would describe today as the good stuff, our best theological minds and voices. And so that was a very dramatic change. I remember 22 years ago preaching and telling the church, I'm packing my bags from charismatic Christianity and moving on. Now, I did it with enough rhetorical skill that they applauded, until I actually did it. And the biggest tension point, we lost 1,000 people over a few years. And most of them would have come along with where I knew the Lord was leading us until I began to critique America as not a kind of biblical Israel, but a kind of biblical Babylon. And that
they can go so well.
Did not go. Yeah.
That's an interesting thing, though, Brian, even just this idea of I don't know when it went from this radical movement that empowered people, that embraced the charisma, the Holy Spirit, and kind of moved with the Spirit to this totally entwined with the political, conservative agenda of Americanism. But also I would even say the conservative church. It's really fascinating to me. I went to see the movie, The Revolution, Jesus Revolution.
Yeah, I saw that and I kind of wept through it because that could have been us. I mean, we're just kind of like the Midwest version of that story.
Yeah, but also at the end, so I have a very sensitive, at that point, I think he might have been 11 or 12-year-old kid to Jesus. And he was really unhappy at the end of the movie. And I was like, why are you so unhappy? Because I thought it was a beautiful portrayal of how our fear of the other and exclusionary, practices keep the Holy Spirit out. And I thought it was really interesting that Lonnie Frisbee was portrayed as Jesus. I think that they picked that actor, I think is really fascinating in telling the church something maybe right now. But anyway, at the end, I tried to pry it out of my son, what was the problem? And he said, the last scene, where he goes over and he throws the keys to the church and he says to the guy, it's your church now. And my son said, it's not his church, is it, Mom? It's not his church. It's God's church. And I thought he picked it up. I wonder if that is the trajectory where something beautiful that's Spirit-led turns into something that's not, because it becomes about us and our own desires and decisions instead of the Spirit's.
Yeah, I see several things that I think probably went awry. The rise of a real intense celebrity culture, the embrace of the prosperity gospel, you know, to an absurd extent that it just became about money. And then the foray into politics. And I would say that evangelicals in general, including charismatics, entered the political fray with stunning naivete. I mean, they really entered into it as black and white, good versus evil, light
And also
versus
just
dark.
believing what was said.
Just and
Yeah.
one party, and then bringing almost religious devotion to a political party, which is absurd. That's always going to end in disaster, and it's playing out before our very eyes.
Wow. And what I think is interesting about your story and even how you talk about it right now is that it's not like a willful intent to get here. It's just where the road went until there is now an awakening. So I think that's an interesting, because I think sometimes in our worst moments, we sort of go like, that's what they wanted, or I think there's a trajectory, like a slow cooking that compromises our faith, and we don't even realize it. And I love this born again and again, this idea that we are always invited to be born again and again and again, from above instead of from below, right? So that awakening, was an unease in you? Was it during a prayer time? And then how have you kept up this awakened posture? How do you stay awake in a sleepy culture on a trajectory to compromise?
Well, first of all, it was a growing unease. I just felt increasingly uncomfortable. And you have to remember, by all of the metrics that Americans like to measure success in ministry, we had it made. I mean, it wasn't like things weren't going great. They were going great. And I was increasingly dissatisfied. Like I said, it feels too consumerist, too compromised, too American. So then I went looking for a faith that was worthy of Jesus. I don't know how to say it. I mean, and a lot of it was a theological development. So I got real serious about theology. I mean, really serious. And so I would spend hours every night reading hardcore academic theology and loving every moment of it. It wasn't work. It was like, where have you been all of my life? And so I was making up for lost time. How do I keep up what I did? Well, I don't know. I can say some things. I don't want them to sound like cliche, though. But I don't know what else to say.
Things become cliche for a reason, though, and that's usually because they're quite true quite often.
In midlife, I also learned how to pray well. I'll just say it like that. I mean, I didn't know how to pray well. I tried to pray, I attempted. I had great resolve, but I knew that I really didn't have a good, what we would call, prayer life. And that changed a little over 20 years ago. And there's a whole elaborate story. I don't have time to tell this story, but it involves some dreams and all sorts of things. I mean, I won't tell the whole, it's a real long story. I'm just going to give you the bullet point. One of the dreams I had was I had a dream that I met Abraham in a bookstore in New York City, a used bookstore, and he told me to begin to use prayer books and gave me a kiss. There's more to it than that, but so I began to experiment with prayer books because I'd never done, because charismatics don't do that, and it began to change me. And so I experimented. I began to put together over about 18 months a morning liturgy of prayer that takes about a half an hour to pray. And I was just doing it for myself, and I wasn't even deliberate or conscious. I wouldn't say, okay, now I'm going to form a liturgy of prayer. What happened was just over about 18 months, I kept experimenting and moving different prayers around until it just sort of settled into something. I never said anything about it, but the staff, the team, the people that I do life and ministry with noticed changes in me. And they said, well, what's happened? What's happened to you? I said, well, I think it's because of how I pray. And they said, well, can you teach us? I said, I can show you what I do. I don't know if I can teach you, but I'll just show you what I do. And I thought it would take me like an hour or less to teach them. And I realized when I started, well, there's a lot going on here. And it took 4 or 5 hours to really explain what I'm doing here. And then, so that was it. And so I shared it, and they began to pray that way. But then word got out. And people in the church said, well, we want this. And this is the absolute truth. And I'm a pastor. I've been a pastor for 44 years. You're always trying to get people to come to church. So this was not reverse psychology. I would just say, I don't think you're going to be interested in this. Oh, no, we really are interested. I said, well, I don't know that you are. And I made them talk me into it. And I began with small groups of people. And I would meet them for 5. I made it like 7 a.m. for 5. And I'm not a morning person at all, but whatever. So 7 a.m., 5 consecutive Wednesday mornings. Well, then it got real popular in the church. And so I had to do it a different way. So I finally figured out how to do it in 3 90-minute sessions. So I just was doing it. I knew it was the best thing I was doing as a pastor. I figured that, okay, this is actually helping people. But then people heard about it. And they said, well, if we came from the first one, it was a group from Seattle. They said, if we came, would you teach us? I said, okay. And then that turned into what I just call prayer school, which is really me showing the value of praying according to a liturgy and then introducing them to about 24 prayers and why they are positioned where they are and how they work. And I have conducted prayer school 104 times.
Wow.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
I'll tell you something. Nobody knows this. You're the first people to know this other than like my agent, my wife, and Simon & Schuster is going to publish. They reached out to me. They said,
wow.
We want this to be a book, and we're just going to call it prayer school. We're not going to change anything. Just what you do, what you teach, put it in a book, and we'll publish it.
Yeah, that's great.
So that's
great.
That was a long, rambling response. I apologize.
No, not
but
at all.
That's been the key. I didn't want to just say, well, prayer.
No.
Mm-hmm. I think you're yeah, go ahead, James.
No, I just think it's interesting that Danielle and I talk about this kind of thing, and often people kind of come to her and it's like, what's your secret? What are the kind of 10 steps of success? And Danielle's just like, I just pray a bunch and I have people that pray with me. And it's like, you don't like this response because it's too simple and it's too much work. Like that's the secret is it takes a bunch of time. And as I continue to mature and grow and know Jesus more, I'm like, wow, there really is a correlation between me taking time to pray and think and be intentional. And again, not that circumstances necessarily get better or worse or anything, but where I am in the midst of them. And again, I think prayer is effective in 1,000 different ways. One of the ways I think it is always effective is in the way that it shapes us. And so again, when I'm at a total loss, I'm like, I'll read the Beatitudes, and if that's all I got, that's all I got. Or I'll do Philippians 2:5.
Here's the first thing I say in prayer school, and I say it repeatedly, but the first thing I say is the primary purpose of prayer is not to get God to do what we think God ought to do, but to be properly formed.
Yeah.
And that's why we need prayers that are wiser than we are. I mean, prayer from the heart remains the heart of prayer, but think about it. Angry people pray angry prayers. Fearful people pray fearful prayers. Greedy people pray greedy prayers. And you can kind of pray your way deeper into your own spiritual pathology. And that's why some prayers that are wiser than we are can help lift us out of that. So that's where I begin. That's where prayer school begins, with that.
So, Brian, is prayer school still a thing people could join or take, or do you still offer it?
What happens is I get requests to do them, and I've done it 104 times. So I'm doing one more in Canada somewhere. Calgary.
Oh yeah,
maybe?
is it in Alberta or Calgary or something? I think
Something like that.
Yeah.
And it's like next month, or maybe it's May. I don't know.
That's right, with Bradley Jersak, right?
Remember.
It's a whole thing you're doing there with Bradley Jersak and some other people.
We'll dig that up and put it in our show notes, guys. If anybody's in Alberta,
and that may be the
Calgary.
last one I ever do traveling. I'll still do it at my church, but then I thought, well, okay, we'll put it in book form, and then the book can just go everywhere, and I don't have to travel around and do this 104 more times. I say it like that, like it's negative, but it's just like original. I can't, if you think about it, that's how, 104 4.5 hours. That's a lot of time. And I think I'm going to let a book go out and do this work for me.
I remember hearing
I think one of the evidences of this being one of the secrets, I mean, secret's a weird word, but one of the keys, foundational keys to renewal is the hunger for it. I think
Yeah.
that's what
No,
part of the
it's
story that's so
shocking. Yeah,
beautiful is like people want, and even that, that could you
exactly.
teach us this is literally what the disciples asked Jesus, right? Like, could you teach us how to do this? And I think, and again, that was like I locked myself in a prayer room for 3 hours at a time, 3 times a week. We were doing 24/7 prayer movement when I was church planting 25 years ago. And I would say that's when I learned how to pray, when I had to. And I had to lock the door. It had bad cell reception and there were bed bugs in that room, so I couldn't lie down and sleep. So I had to figure it out. And, like the first 45 minutes to an hour of my prayer time was just me making furious lists of things I had to do and just me being mad that I was wasting my time doing this when I could be
Right.
saving the world. So even just that idea of prayer as a detoxification of like all of the things of our culture that demand our allegiance, and you have to, like, just time, James, just as you said, like, man, this takes time. And time is, like, I would say, one of the idols of our furious consumer-based culture. I don't have time. Gosh, I'm so busy and important. I couldn't possibly. And then just like spending the time with God, even as beginners. So there's something about these are the beginner ancient ways. And I think it's beautiful that people are hungry for that right now. Beautiful. Thanks for doing it. I can't wait for that book to come out. Let's do it.
Wait, so that's another book. So you've got 2 books coming out? Is that what I'm hearing?
I've got
At least 2.
4 books in the works in one stage or another. So I 11 are out, number 12's coming out, and I've got 4 more books to write. And 2 of them are already under contract. So, yeah, that's
What do
a
you,
lot
I
of my
feel
life
like
is writing these days.
you've been big on Dostoevsky and
Yes.
looking deeply into his works. I feel like, are you in competition with him right now in terms of output?
No, I'm not. Oh,
Are you like, if he can write from the Gulag, I could probably write from Missouri?
I love
Yeah.
Dostoevsky. He's helped me so much. And so, yeah, I did Brothers Karamazov. But that's another, there's sometimes things surprise you. So the interest in prayer school surprised me. I thought, who's going to be interested in this? And then there's a lot of hunger. And then a year ago, a little more, a year and 3 or 4 months ago, I didn't know. I thought, it was my own team. They said, you're always talking about Dostoevsky. Do an online course on the Brothers Karamazov that you love so much. I say, yeah. You think there'll be any interest? Yes. Okay. 1,600 people registered, or 1,600 computers. A lot of them were couples. 1,600 registrations for that.
Wow.
Good
To
That's
take
amazing.
people through a massive Russian novel. And then similar interest with Demons that I just got done doing. I'll probably maybe next year do The Idiot. We'll see.
Yeah. But I mean, talk about back to this kind of like prophetic, whether or not you intend to be or not, but this like, could there be a better author and teller of the good news, in a format that could be received subversively in the middle of a tyrannical empire? It's just like, gee, I wonder if there's some sort of spirit strategy here. It's great.
Yeah, I don't have the strategy. I kind of live in the moment and I've reached the point where, 44 years, single church, one church. And let's be honest. Yes, I just came from our 3-hour staff meeting that I'm a part of every Tuesday, but the real leading, running, pastoring the church is not done by me these days. I'm part of the team, but I've reached, you don't get to start here, but I've reached the point where pretty much, you know what I do? I do what I want to do. And I think that's good. You don't start there.
Yeah.
But when I say I do what I want to do, I think I've reached a point where I can do that. And that's another way to say it that makes it sound more palatable is I'm allowed now to really do what I'm passionate about. Whatever I just, the fire's burning for that. That's what I do.
It's beautiful. And one of the fires is pilgrimage.
Mm-hmm. That's
So
true.
you're also often Camino walking. Tell me more about that as
At any given
formula.
moment, no matter what I'm doing, I would rather be walking the Camino. So the Camino de Santiago. This is a 1,200-year-old pilgrim path that in the 13th century, 500,000 people a year were walking it. Then it almost died out. In the 1960s and 70s, less than 50 people a year were walking it. But there was this priest, an Ocibrero, Father Elias, And he just, I don't know, he had this, we were talking about, we do things and we don't know why we do them, and they turn out sometimes to be a big deal. He just thought, people are going to need this. And so he went with what would be one of the most traveled routes, the Francaise route. He bought boxes and boxes and boxes of yellow spray paint. And he went to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, France, and began just marking the way to Santiago with these yellow arrows, these fletches. And that was like 1987. And that year, over 2,000 people walked, because it's been marked, again. When Perry and I walked our first one in 2016, there was like 250,000 people. And then just last year, 570,000 pilgrims. So something is drawing people. If you do what I'm talking about, you start in Saint-Jean and you go to Santiago, it's 500 miles. We walked every step of the way. We've done it 4 times. And carrying your life is reduced to this blessed simplicity of, what do I have to do today? Get up, walk 12 to 15 miles west. That's it. Now, that takes more time than you think. I mean, you got to do that. And what do I wear? What I wear is what I didn't wear yesterday. Or, you wear what you have on, and then you have one change in your pack. And so what do you take with you on the Camino? It's like that, it's that line from U2. All that you can bring is all that you can't leave behind. And that becomes literal for you. What am I going to take with all that I can't leave behind? And what almost all pilgrims discover, especially if their first time, about a week into it, you discover you can leave more behind than you thought. If you got to carry it on your back, it's like, I don't think I really need this. And there it is.
Right.
And so your life is lightening. You're lightening your load. You're becoming simple. It's quiet. We don't move any faster than foot speed for about 40 days. I mean, everything slows down. Can I talk a little more about this?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So there's a movie starring Martin Sheen called The Wait. A lot of people have seen this. I think it came out I don't know when it came out, like 20 years ago. But Perry and I saw it in 2012. We didn't even, Perry kind of heard about it. We just watched it here at home, That might have been long enough ago. I don't know. I almost want to say that it was Netflix, like when you got the disc in the mail. It was.
We're showing our age here. That's okay.
But we didn't quite know what this was. And we watched this movie, which is, about walking the Camino. And the movie was over, and we said, well, we're going to do that. Now, it was 4 years before we really felt like we could. We waited, but we planned it. We said, okay, in 2016, we're going to do this. I've already told you a little bit about losing 1,000 people in our church. And that was very, very painful, because these were people we loved and knew. So these were people, think about like this. Maybe these were people, well, lots of them were, that we had led to the Lord, that we had baptized. We'd done their wedding. We'd baptized their kids. We'd done the wedding for their kids. And now they're leaving saying that we're backslidden. And, I feel like the opposite's happened, but okay. That lasted, the pain of that and the trying to move our church into a better place, that lasted for 10 years, from about 2004 to 14. By 14, everything was okay. We were essentially what we are today. But Perry and I weren't well yet, and we didn't know this. We were still hurt. And all I can say is, in this, I don't know how to explain it exactly, but we began that walk on September 14th, 2016, and 40 days later, all of that pain was gone. We walked deep into peace. It was a 40-day, 500-mile pilgrimage into deep peace that really has never left us. That doesn't mean that we don't have challenges, but we do talk about our life a little bit pre and post Camino. And it
Beautiful.
Again, I'm bumping up against cliches, but I don't know what else. It changed our life. Okay, we say that a lot. Stone cold fact. changed our life. Now, that doesn't mean that that's somebody else's story or that's what we're just on a podcast talking. And I'm telling you, it changed us. And that's why we've done others, because we like it and we know it's good for our soul. But it was that first one that was the big deal.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot in the process of a pilgrimage like that is, it is almost building a resistance to all of the things of our culture that lead us on a trajectory of compliance and compromise, right? So it is the slow. I walked the St. Cuthbert Way with my son on his 13th for his
Yeah,
13th
I've done that 3
pilgrimage.
times.
Yeah, it's a little quicker,
65
but
miles.
but even still,
Beautiful and quiet, and I love it.
gorgeous. Yeah, gorgeous. And a little less touristy in a way, like
Mhm.
you meet less people along the way if you want that. But I also found like it was so frustrating because I said I've never gone this distance this slowly in my whole life. Like this is just the slowest I've
Mhm.
ever moved.
Did you want to do
And
it in
yet
like a
it's-
day, Danielle? Just like, why was this
Well, but it was
rattle
still so
through there?
challenging. We were exhausted. I mean, we were exhausted, but we had never gone this slow before. And the pace itself is almost like a remedy for, one of the
Exactly.
infections of our culture of frenzied speed. So I think there's a lot, even just the slowing down to the pace of relationship, where you're literally just with each other and you can be with each other without this need to have to be doing something because you're literally just walking together. And then you just start thinking about how much of Jesus's life was that. And it
Yeah.
seemed to be a pretty effective strategy.
Yeah, I tell people my pilgrim self is my best self. And I'm trying to bring my pilgrim self more and more into when I'm not actually walking pilgrimage. But
Right.
that's
You keep the
my most
same strategy
contemplative
pace.
self. That's where you mentioned when everything's on fire. That whole book was born just one day. Well, I say one day. I kept knowing people that were losing their faith and just falling right out of the faith. And I thought, if we could just walk together, because, we're talking about this, that, you have hours, you're moving slow and you're talking and you don't have to, it's not a hurried conversation. What might I say to someone to help them stay within the Christian faith? And I thought about that for about 2 weeks. Just, we'd walk and I would just think about that. And then one day I'd say in the book, but I can't remember what town it
Notre
was.
Dame?
No, here it is. It doesn't matter. It's just a town that nobody's heard of. Anyway, just sketched out what became that book. I mean, lots of times books, you don't know what they're going to be like until you start writing and but this one, I mean, I wrote the chapter titles and
It
it
came to
turned
you.
out to be pretty much just like that.
Yeah.
But I was able to do that because I was in a different contemplative, quiet state. And I think it comes out in the book, if I can say that.
I loved one of my favorite parts of that book is the conversation you had with the guy on the train,
Mhm.
the young guy on the
You.
train.
You.
Yeah.
That was his name. On the day that Derrida died, October 7th, 2004 in Paris.
And one of the things I really love about your voice in all of your work that I've read, and this is something that I think is partly your own journey, your own maturity, and the depth of which you travel. But I was saying to James, like, there's lots of new voices that are doing well at critiquing, the Christian culture, but not many voices that can hold the critique and offer something more. And so I think there's one thing that can kind of tear down, which also it's also true. I am looking for and wanting to learn from and point people towards voices that will also give a remedy, like offer a place of growth and flourishing and peace, not just, this is wrong, but here's what's beautiful and right. So I really love and that's probably also your pastoral heart too. You really just want to help people, not just critique the church,
Right.
And
I love the
that.
church. I love the uniqueness of the church. There's nothing, at its best, there's nothing to compare with the church.
There is a good chance if you are listening to this, you are either in some sort of stage of deconstruction or you know someone who is. And I think it's really reassuring to know there are these resources out there as well. There are wise, kind, thoughtful voices who can still see the beauty of the church whilst also holding sometimes the cruelty and the ugliness of it. People love Brian's book. Right now, I'm actually going through Out the Embers by our friend Bradley Jersak, who's great. And it's just been really helpful for people who thought like, oh, I thought I was done. Like I thought all was left was critique. I didn't think there was anything constructive left. And so I think allowing voices like Brian's to be a constructive and hopeful voice is so important right now, because again, it is important to hold church accountable, and it is important to expect better. We 100% agree with that, but we also need people that show us what better looks like. Fortunately, Brian's one of those people.
And Bradley Jersak is one of them. You know, we're just pals. You know.
Yeah, I know you are. That's why I'm not trying to blow up your spot.
Our friendship is a theological collaboration, and we really just influence each other. I might have written the foreword for Out of the Embers. Did I write the foreword for that?
Yeah, you did. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And he wrote the foreword for this.
Yeah,
we're just a mutual admiration society and cheering each other on.
Yeah, I love part of what I love. I guess this is also just like me getting older, but I'm looking at people who have been in this longer than I have, who are still hopeful, still flowing, still discovering, so this idea, even Brian, of like just being born again and again and again. Like, I was with one of my mentors. Every time I meet her, actually, she's just telling me about this person she met and how exciting that person is and how much she's learning about this and how, she's looking forward to this. And she's like 80.
Yeah.
And, we have these pictures of like an 80-year-old, curmudgery person that's like, stuck in their ways and, they see things as they see them as. And this is the opposite of that. This is somebody who is wide open to the ways of Jesus. And the same is true. I think that's what's really beautiful about having, mentors or models in the faith who are still discovering. And that discovery is the posture of mature Christianity.
Yes. Look, as we get older, we have the opportunity to become a contemplative. That is, a person who is able to hold many things, hopefully all things together in love. But the temptation is also to become a curmudgeon. You can become a contemplative or a curmudgeon. And I don't want to be a curmudgeon.
Pick your path.
I don't necessarily want to suffer all fools gladly, but no, I think there is, the New Testament talks about the leadership in local churches by giving them the title elder. I think you could replace that word in your thinking. And every time, just experiment with this. Every time you see the word elder, place it with contemplative. Because we live in a time of a very combative Christianity in its most public forms. It's combative. It's angry. It's wanting to fight. So the future of the church as a reliable witness will be when the church is led by contemplatives and not combatants. Now, it does say elder because it generally takes some time to get there, which I also mean by time, I also mean some suffering. Which life is very good at arranging for us. And we come through those periods of time if we are able to walk through that with Jesus. And, Jesus said that the Father will give you the Holy Spirit if you'll ask. And if you can go through something with the right perspective, the right attitude, the right spirit, okay? A Holy Spirit. You come out on the other side bearing some wisdom and greater compassion and the ability to hold, again, all things together in love. That's the kind of leadership we need in the church, and it's not being modeled hardly at all. You see it in a few places. The culture wars have been a disaster for a certain part of the church, and we need something altogether different.
I think one of the things that you speak about in your writing and you've spoken about here is recognizing these things come at a really great cost. And it's something I've kind of realized recently, that the pastor that I knew growing up and how important he was to me because of how loving and compassionate and patient he was. I think in my mind, he was just naturally like that It never cost him anything. He was just that good of a guy. And again, he's an amazing guy. Like, I still can't fault him or anything. But I've had some, you have some conversations. I'm a pastor too. And you choosing to do the loving, gracious thing sometimes is incredibly costly. And I think to do that with grace sometimes gives the impression it isn't as costly as it is. And so when you talk about those people leaving, I mean, I wish I had 1,000 people to lose. The few people, those conversations tear my heart out. And I still want to, my dream.
Hard. It was really hard.
And I can't imagine, I cannot imagine losing that many people. Like, as I say, the 3 conversations I've had not too long ago, my dream, my hope, my posture is, let's try to make sure this isn't the last time we talk. Like, that's my heart going in. And even though they're telling me things that are hard and some quite stern disagreements and painful things, but I want to acknowledge and kind of highlight those parts as well. And again, it's worth it. It's a price that I don't happily pay it, but I'm willing to pay. But I think just it's worth listening to voices like Brian's and seeing that there is a great cost that comes with that kind of that graciousness as well. It's not because it's easy, it's because it's the best answer, but it's not the easiest one. As you say, the culture war stuff, it's much easier for me to hit back. Like, that's way easier. I know my arguments, I know I'm right, let's go kind of thing. But actually now we don't have a conversation. Now the relationship's broken down. And that's the worst thing that can happen. And so my prayer every time is let's try to make sure this isn't the last conversation. And sometimes it is, and that hurts too.
Brian, what do you think the best way to navigate speaking truth with maintaining a loving posture?
Well, I think you have to honestly evaluate what your level of influence is on a particular person or a particular audience. And if you really aren't going to have any chance to possibly move the trajectory, then I think all you're doing is throwing gasoline on a fire. And so just don't do that. Now, that's hard to do. And I try not to speak from anger. I don't think I'm an angry person now, but I know that I can be. There is that part of my being. But I try not to speak and preach and write in a reactive way. Even when I'm bringing maybe a criticism or a critique of a compromised Christianity that I see in America right now, in line with empire instead of the kingdom of heaven. But even then, I don't want it to turn into snark and bitterness. There has to be a gentleness. There has to be a kind of wooing and inviting people into something better.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that all comes from prayer. If I'm not sitting with Jesus, praying the prayers, and then listening, if I'm not doing that day after day, then I will revert into a guy that can be angry and snarky, and I don't want to be that person. So I don't know if there's any great secret to it, but we have to be aware of these things.
Yeah.
We're passing through a moment where rage is almost required of us in certain circles. And that's not really, that belongs to the entire spectrum of the culture wars, that you are obligated to be enraged. And no, here's something that's really helped me over the last, this would be the last, 3 or 4 years. It's kind of a prayer. I confess it every day. It's kind of more of a confession. It comes from Saint Teresa of Avila, 16th century nun, mystic, theologian. And it's called Saint Teresa's bookmark for whatever reason. But it goes like this: let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. All things are passing away. God never changes. Patience obtains all things. Whoever has God lacks nothing. God alone suffices. Now, that is completely contrary to the wisdom of this age, right? Let nothing disturb you. No, we want you to
and hers too. Like she's surviving the witch trials, right?
Yeah.
So also hers. Like, this isn't just her like in some monastery somewhere,
No.
Not under threat. This is like her coming up with this prayer out of the fires of her
exactly
rejection and pain. Yeah.
Let
Amazing.
nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. All things are passing away, which is a grace, right? So all evil has an expiration date. It can't endure
Right.
forever. It's passing away.
Right.
That kind of demeanor, that kind of attitude, that kind of approach to life and conflict, and I think that's very healthy. And so I try to do that. I try to carry that kind of spirit. Not that I'm always successful, but at least I'm returning to that. At some point every morning in my prayer, I'm saying, nothing disturb you, Brian. Let nothing frighten you. All things are passing away. It's God that never changes. Patience obtains all things. You know what? Patience and wisdom are, in my mind, quite nearly synonymous. As I evaluate my life, as I look back, okay, my most foolish moments were almost always based in impatience. And if I can find some moments where I think, I acted with wisdom there, what I was mostly doing was being patient.
Wow. That's good. That's a good word. I'm often interested in how wisdom is almost always portrayed in the feminine in the scripture, and how some of that,
I was just
I think,
reading that in Proverbs today.
yeah, and I think we reject wisdom, and accept knowledge because knowledge feels more masculine, at least in the patriarchal settings of church. But
Well, then it
so it's very
becomes
interesting to me,
technology.
right? Or just like knowledge that puffs up, right? So just this
Mhm.
idea of like even posturing and one-upping, and again, which is all this like snark. Snark is just one-upping outrage, isn't it? Even though it's so tempting to do if you're smart. But yeah, it's good. There's really wise counsel, Brian. I think the listeners of our podcast are a variety of people, but many of them in church, in leadership of some kind, and who are contemplating these things and are regularly thanking me on my travels for actually just having these conversations with people like you. So thanks for offering the wisdom that you have. We're grateful for it. Thanks for the things that you've been doing, just writing from a beautiful spot. It matters. I know it's weird to have something matter that you just are like, you're just doing your thing, but it does. And thanks for the projects coming up. Sound exciting. I'm looking forward to getting those books.
Can
So
we
thanks for it.
can we do like a couple of minute plug? Good Friday is coming up. I feel the wood between the worlds this is the time of year. It's always good to read, but this time especially. I think on the violence of the cross a lot, and perhaps what is going on and the mechanisms that we talk about on this podcast from time to time. The Wood Between the Worlds it's basically like what the best people in the last 2,000 years have said about the cross. It's like the best way I can sum it up to people. It's kind of a taster to all the best minds on this. So we have Cone, speaking from a Black liberation theologian perspective, wrote one of the most important books in the last 100 years. Jürgen Moltmann, again, one of the most important books. And then we have lines from Christ the Conqueror of Hell, which is a collection of sermons and essays and thoughts from right at the very, very beginning. So we have thousands of years of wisdom of the cross, and perhaps the way that we have kind of looked at it in the wrong place. I know, Brian, you can clarify it even better than I can, but say I love this book. Also, this may be the first and last time I ever say this. The book cover is gorgeous. Like, I don't care at all about this thing ever, and it's just so beautiful.
Yeah.
It is. I can brag about it because I had nothing to do with it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, whoever came up with that.
But that's one of the things I think I really love too about your writing is that you are taking people to deep places, but not in an inaccessible way. So you are really bringing people on a walk with you and introducing them even to voices and people that they might not just randomly stumble by. And that's a beautiful pastoral work that you're doing for people that aren't even anywhere near your church, but you're taking them by the hand and saying, hey, you got to meet these people. You got to meet this. And it's really beautiful. Yeah.
Good, Daniel.
Really lovely.
That's something I'm doing intentionally. I found these treasures in the world of academic theology, but if it stays in the academy, then what's the point? And so I graze in the field of academic theology and try to bring forth, something that's metabolized and I can give to people, that
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
trying
They
to be a
can receive
bridge
it.
between those two worlds.
Yeah, it's good. You're doing a great job of it. I appreciate it. That's it. I feel like there's so much more to learn from you, but I feel like we've taken up all the time that we promised to take up. But we're grateful for what we had, and people follow along. We'll put some links in the notes where you can follow more and get more from Brian and hear more of his wisdom. But we're looking forward to the more. Brian, we're looking forward to what more there is and excited about this season and you in it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for listening.